Welcome to Choosing Leadership, a podcast for leaders who refuse to play small. I am Sumit Gupta, founder of Tangent Partners. I am here because I see too many brilliant leaders trapped in daily firefights. Too many companies hitting walls that they do not need to hit. Too many people waiting for weekends instead of waking up every day excited to go to work. And very frankly, that is unacceptable to me. At Tangent Partners, we are an unapologetic call to excellence. This podcast is not about giving you more content. It is about shifting the context under which you operate. Because leadership is not a position. Leadership is a choice. In each episode, I will bring you conversations with leaders who have made these choices, the uncomfortable ones, the courageous ones, and the ones that changed everything for them and their companies. And with that, keep listening and let's get started. Hi, and welcome to the Choosing Leadership podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, right? You are the CEO of Community International Northern Ireland. But before we get into that, I think you have a very interesting story of growing up in Ireland, then moving to London, then coming back. Can you share a bit more of your backstory, especially how do the dots connect in taking you where you are today?
You're right. I grew up in Northern Ireland in a small town, and I went to university here. I did my honours degree, and then I did my master's. I did an MBA here. I suppose I always wanted to go away to spend some time in America and some time in France. And I was working here in the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, looking at the funding the reintegration of political ex-prisoners as part of the peace process here for a number of years. And I met my husband. He's English. He's from London. And I decided then that I would go to London and with him, and I got married the following year to him. And at that stage, I was working for the Met Police as a community engagement. And then I went to work in football for a number of years. And then I wanted to come home back to Northern Ireland because I love here and I'm very proud to be from here. And so we came home. I applied for this job, which was a full circle because I used to work as a officer for the Community Foundation, and the role came up as CEO. And I applied and I came home, and that was 5 years ago. And I've never missed it. I don't miss London, and I don't miss working football. I love being home. I love being around. Being Northern Ireland is particularly beautiful, I think. And I live in a particularly nice place of it. I live in a very small town called Donegal, which is beside the sea. So I swim in the sea and paddleboard. So it's brilliant. I'm really happy to be home.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Can you share what shaped you as a person and then eventually the work that you do, right? And also the part in Ireland, the part in London. Can you give us a sense of what makes you you?
I grew up as Catholic here in Northern Ireland, and I grew up in a pretty Protestant town. We were the minority by a long shot. And I think that for a long time, when going to school, you would have got pretty much quite a lot of violence directed. You would have got quite a lot of verbal abuse, and you would have got quite a lot of physical abuse for being a Catholic. So I think that sort of shaped what I always wanted to do, which was always about equality and always about inclusion and what it means to feel under threat, both either physically or verbally or just in your day-to-day lives. What it's like to feel like the minority and to feel like you can't be yourself. And I think it always shaped what I wanted to do. I was a youth worker when I left university, and I worked with young women around outdoor education. Again, trying to get young women to be accepted into outdoor education, which was predominantly male. And I moved into London. As I said, then moving into working into this field here, working with the ex-prisoners, and what that meant was part of the peace process. And that was a big challenge for me because as a Catholic, I had to work with loyalist ex-prisoners as well as Republican ex-prisoners, and that's fairly challenging work with people who have significantly different views than me.
Yeah.
But it gives you a fair amount of resilience. So it means when I went to London to work in the Met Police, and then subsequently into football, Met Police was about community engagement, working with communities that didn't have a lot of confidence in the police. And then into working in football around, first of all, as head of equality for the Football Foundation, which gives out a number of grants to organisations that use football as a means to inclusion. And then moving on from that to become the CEO of Pick It Out, which is Pitbull's anti-discrimination campaign for 10 years. So it seems a bit strange. There's not sort of the best links, but the one thing that runs through it all is an ability to want to change the world, change things, and ability to make whatever I'm doing open to everybody, because I felt that it wasn't open for me when I was younger. So that's probably what drove me the most. It's probably the thing that still drives me doing this job now. I'm making sure that inclusion is at the heart of everything we do as a community foundation. It's what I've done in my volunteer, like I'm a magistrate, so I work with family and youth court, but also I'm a volunteer with the Irish AA and also with St. Paul, which is a Catholic organisation that supports people in poverty. So it's the links. Doesn't seem linked to anybody asks me, but it's linked to my head. Why I do what I do.
Yeah. And you said it was not easy, right? It was difficult. You are facing prisoners from both sides. But can you share, like, how was it difficult, especially internally for you? When you stand for justice, you stand for equality, and yet sometimes you don't like somebody or you don't like what they stand for. So how do you move forward, right? When there's a personal dislikeness or a personal, even anger maybe at something based on where you grew up or based on just what you see somebody doing or saying.
It's funny. I was speaking at an event last week in London, actually, and we're doing quite a lot of work on the back of the race riots that happened here in Belfast and back of Southport, both in 2024 and 2025. And I said, look, I've been an anti-racist campaigner for a long time, but when I was in Kick It Out, sometimes you sat in a room with lots of other anti-racist campaigners saying, isn't racism bad? How much is that changing? You're talking to people who agree with you, so you're not really changing things. And I think I remember sitting when I did the ex-prisoner work here in Belfast. I remember sitting with a loyalist ex-prisoner and a Republican ex-prisoner, and they both said the same thing, which is, I'm never going to be a Republican and you're never going to be a loyalist. But what we have to find a way is to coexist together in peace. And I remember thinking that was actually really good, because it's difficult for me to speak to somebody who's anti-immigration because I'm not. But I think the ability to have those difficult conversations and to sit in a difficult space is really critical, because if not, we're not going to change. There's some people whose opinion you'll never change. I always think there's people who get it, there's people who never get it, but most people are in the middle and they vary, they move from one to the other. And if we want to change the world, if we want to change people's opinions, then we have to work with them, even though they may not have the same opinion as me. And I think you do that through listening, active listening, and you do it through also making sure that you have the right level of information so that you can challenge misinformation, disinformation. And you have to suspend your judgment for a while, in a sense of you think you need to get to where we want to get to, which is to make people, the fact that you may not agree with me, but you're not going to go out into the streets and riot and put people out of their houses or attack people because of their ethnicity or their sexual orientation or their gender. And I think we have to challenge. I think the time for not challenging is gone now. And I think if you look at what's happening in all parts of not just the UK and Europe, that polarisation, the rise of the far right, it's not enough to sit in your house and say, isn't that terrible? Because that silence is acquiescence. Here's now saying, I think it's terrible, but what are you going to do? You have to do something about it, because if you don't, then those with the largest voices are the ones that get heard. And I don't think that's the majority of people. I think the majority of people aren't like that, but their voices are very loud. And if you don't challenge, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing from that is you don't have to like somebody or you don't have to agree with somebody and still be engaged in a dialogue or at least living up to your values, right? When in a world like we live in, it's almost very easy to either fight or to totally shut off and disengage. Yeah. But I want to ask you have lived a life like fighting for your values and living by your values. What has that cost you?
What's the cost is a good question. I suppose when I was here, when I was working with ex-prisoners, that was fairly, you would have got a lot of people commenting on that, saying that we're funding violence and we're funding paramilitaries. When we weren't, we were funding, it was part of the peace process. Those players were part of the peace process. So I would have got quite a lot of negative feedback. When I was in Kick It Out, you got a lot of stick from people. I think what I always think, So we launched the first reporting app that we developed it ourselves, that you could report discrimination in the game. It's brilliant. It was in partnership with Salesforce Foundation. And I went up to Manchester, to the BBC, to launch it and to say on TV, this is great. If you're frightened about reporting discrimination, this is a great way to do it. You just download the app. It'll geolocate you in the stadium. You can report it. Something be done about it. And on the way back down, on the train back to London, which was only 2.5 hours, my comms guy was getting paler and grey, and I was like, what is wrong with you? What's wrong? He goes, you're getting an awful lot of negative feedback, an awful lot. We got to London and we had our first report in, and we phoned the office and they said, we've had our first, somebody's used the app to report. Brilliant, it works. Yeah, they've reported you. I said, what for? It said, oh, for being racist against white people. But I wasn't being racist against white people. I said, this is the equality legislation in this country says, under the Equality Act, that if you come down to the final two and you're unrepresented by women or people with disability or people from an ethnic minority background, and both candidates are equally qualified and equally experienced, you can decide to choose upon that to make sure that your workforce becomes more reflective. That's the law. That's not my interpretation of it. That's just actually the law of this country. And so there was just lots of people went online, and I got a lot. So fairly abusive stuff. And I won't go on social media now because I got quite a lot of abuse. And I think also that I'm fairly cynical about social media outlets. And I think, in fact, I'm very cynical. I think when I was in Kick It Out, we worked with Twitter and Facebook, Twitter as it was now, X as it is now, and Facebook, around discrimination, the significant amounts of discrimination. I find they did nothing. They could have done stuff, but they chose not to because it hits their bottom line. So I'm fairly cynical about that. And so I won't go on social media, but what's it cost? Look, often you could be in a room where you're the only person saying the only thing, you know what I mean? And I have absolute empathy for somebody. And I've said this recently when speaking at a European Community Foundations network. We're very lucky in the sense this foundation is a social justice organisation. That's what we stand for. We're a principled actor in this arena. I'm like that, my staff are like that, my board are like that. So therefore, it's easy for us it's not easy, but it's easier for us to call things out because I have the backing of my staff. It's more difficult when you're on your own. And I've been in rooms where I had to say, sorry, can you not say that? People who start conversations with, I'm not racist, but invariably then say something racist. And often you're the only person there saying that, or you're the only person saying, do you know this misogynistic? Do you know this homophobic? And therefore, and that's tough sometimes because you're thinking, oh God, I'm going to have to say it. I'm going to have to call it out because you have to live your own values. And either people get uncomfortable or aggressive or both. Or there's just stony silence. But that's just the way it is. I'm not going to change who I am now. But I do have empathy for people for calling things out because you will, and I think increasingly get significant abuse about it.
Yeah.
If you say you're pro-immigration, people just think you're crazy.
Yeah. On a lighter note, football fans or like people dealing with all of these big issues, whom do you find like difficult to handle?
I'm a football fan. That's why I went into working football. I'm a Liverpool fan. I've been a Liverpool fan since I was 8 years old. So I love football. I love football fans. I think it has an innate power to do social good and do loads of great things. The problem with football is that people sometimes think it's okay. They would never say it in their daily lives or in their workplace, but they think it's perfectly acceptable to set them and you put them into a football stadium. What we're saying is, and so people have accused me of being the fun police and trying to sanitise football. I have no interest in that. What my interest is taking discrimination in football. I'm a fervent. We play Man United. I'm shouting at the Man United fans. I'm just not racistly shouting at the Man United fans or the players. And I think there is also this debate about the football players that get paid a lot of money. You can give them as much abuse as you want. And I never bought into that because if you go to work or I go to work, if someone said something racist or homophobic or misogynist, we'd absolutely, they'd be like, oh my God, go to HR, is they? But so whenever footballers go on to a football pitch, that's their job. They're going into their profession. So they are entitled to the level of respect that anybody else is in their profession. And they're particularly entitled to not being racially abused when they're doing their job. So it's difficult. I'd say the majority of football fans are decent people. They love the game. They're fanatical about it, like myself, but sometimes they love the football, they love going to football. I've spent many years watching football at every single league throughout England, so it's fine. But there is an element in that thinks it's absolutely acceptable to racially abuse footballers. And I find that really wrong. And I think we did some work with fan education. When I was in Kicking Out, we set fan education in partnership with Football Supporters Federation. And that was about trying to train fans or work with fans that had been found guilty of discrimination to say, you may not think what you're saying is wrong. And often people say everybody else was thinking it, so I just sang along. Not totally sure that I would buy that anyway, but I remember doing a film around homophobia saying, you wouldn't say it in your workplace, but why would you say it on the terraces? And it's true, you wouldn't. And so people have to understand that when footballers go to work and when I go to a football game, I don't want to hear racist or homophobic abuse. I want to enjoy the game. I'm passionate about the game. We don't need that. That doesn't contribute to the game. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's hard. Is it both? I'd say depends on the day.
Yeah. And I think it's a very good point, right? That irrespective of what you do or how much you earn, nobody deserves abuse, right? And it is very easy to point it at somebody who is a high earner or who is a CEO or who is a leader or who is a politician, because you don't see them as part of you. And suddenly it's very easy to use words to abuse or to put them, like we say, put them in their place. But I think it's time to say that nobody, no matter who they are, how much they earn, what they do, but their background deserves anything which is not loving.
Exactly. I've heard many people say to me, the bulb there, they know what you're getting, that's what they get paid the big money. No, it's their profession. They're a professional sports person. They deserve the respect that's entitled to them. They don't deserve to be racially or sexually abused because of that reason. So I never bought into that, and I don't think it's a legitimate argument to say I can say whatever I want to because he's on 5 times, 6 times what I am a week. That's neither here nor there. It's that they're a professional and they deserve the respect that they're entitled to.
Yeah. What have you taken away from football or sport, right? Because I also see football as a great unifier, right? It can bridge, divide, or make people forget the divisions. What have you taken away from football that, let's say, you have bring to community work, to social justice work?
Look, I'll always say this. I've said this every time I'm working. Football has a way to reach into communities. It's very little thing other things don't have. Now, whether you agree with it or not, that's the fact. You talk to, and I think at the moment, I sit as non-exec on the Irish FA's Foundation Board, and they're doing really significant work around. Now, we have the terrible title of Femicide Capital of Europe in Belfast because of the levels of violence against young women and girls. And the Football Foundation, or the foundation from the Irish FA here, is doing significant work with Women's Aid and football clubs. And I think that's brilliant because that is, when you walk into a football club and there's players there, they're in a place that they feel safe and trusted that they can be open in. So you can have significant effect if you bring people in to talk to them when they're not being lectured at and they're in their space. And it's the same as footballers. And I remember I've always said this to footballers, whether you like it or not, you're ambassadors. You may not want to be an ambassador, but you are. So I can come and lecture a room for the kids about something. They will, and the minute you walk in the door, what you say is gospel. And that's a big power to have. And so therefore you can do significant good with that. So I think football is throughout the world, wherever you go, a game of football is probably the world sport because it's 2 jumpers and a football and you go anywhere. And I've been in different places where I've seen football and gone to watch football. That intensity, that feeling of belonging that maybe people don't get from anywhere else. They feel they belong to their club. It's their team. It's their club. I think people want that feeling of belonging and maybe they don't get it through anywhere else. So I think that's really important. But I think it has an ability to change. And when I was in the Football Foundation, I ran a couple of programs, one looking at older people in football and one looking at young service veterans and mental health and football. And it goes you through the diversity because older people, they were using the clubs as like a hub, which I think most football clubs should be in a community, bringing older people in to do not necessarily football, to do things like walking tours of the stadium that addresses isolation and loneliness and also physical health. And with young service veterans, young service veterans who leave the forces relatively early are massively more susceptible to suicide than anybody else. So this is a way to actually bring them in, give them support and message without it being as labelled as such.
Yep.
This is about you contemplate football. But in that time, when you're there, people can see you, you can feel with your colleagues, you can feel. So I think it is, I still believe football is probably one of the most powerful things in the world to change people's minds and to change how they interact. And it's a force for good when it's used for good. We've seen it when it's been used for bad, but still think it can be used for significant good.
Yeah. How have you taken, because this is a real issue of belonging and isolation. Today we are very well connected to our devices. But because of technology, I think that connection between human beings is like more broken than ever. How
I
have you
agree.
built belonging in communities where people are alone or they are working remotely, or the traditional communities are no longer there or no longer that strong?
No, and I think that's why people are looking. I still think, I really strongly believe that people, they want to belong. They still need that sense of belonging. That's what,
Yeah.
you're right. I think television and the internet and everything has maybe disconnected people. I think particularly young people. My first job was a youth worker, so I'm really interested in young people. And I think young people need to belong and they feel they have to belong. So I think whatever we do, and whatever we do in our, whether it's a sponsor or whether it's a paid role, we've got to look at what it means like to belong. And because, and I remember speaking to a group, and it was in a big IT company in London, and trying to explain my work and kick it out. And I said, and the guy said, "You never understand. You're a white, middle class, middle aged guy. You'll never understand what it's like to be discriminated against because of your gender, or because of your race." But think back to the first time, maybe, and all of us had this experience where when you were younger and something happened and your friends went somewhere and you were excluded and you didn't, and there was a party and you weren't invited to it or something like that. He says, remember how upset you were, remember how angry you felt. I says, that's just that much of what it's like to be discriminated against. I said, you're being excluded for no reason. You haven't done anything to justify that exclusion. I said, so imagine how hurt you must feel that when you walk into a room, because you're either a woman or because you're black or Asian or because you're gay or because you're disabled, that either people exclude you, don't engage with you, or you're not even allowed into the room. And I've been places where I've not been allowed into the room because of my gender. I said, and that's what being excluded feels like. Because we want to belong. We are a social animal. We want that feeling of belonging. And I think it's really important that we remember that and don't. And I think working remotely, we bring our team in at least once or twice a week. Not so much for the work, but more to remember that connection, to remember what that connection. And I think it's particularly difficult for young people doing work, or for people when you start a new job. And normally you would, by the time you've been in the job, normally in the past, you would have known everybody within the first month, 2 months, because you've seen them. Now you can go 6 months, you're thinking, I've never met the person, I've only ever met them online.
Yeah.
And I think that humanity, that ability to touch each other and are connected through that physicality, I think is critical, to be honest, because it can't be replaced, I don't think, by tech. I think it has to be, we still are human beings who need that human link into people.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you manage the emotional side of it, right? Because there is real trauma in isolation. There is real trauma in being discriminated against, which can many times carry or stay with us for decades, right? How do you still stay human and not get traumatized yourself when you are dealing with this in front of you always?
I think it's hard, to be honest. I think, particularly Northern Ireland, I think trauma runs the whole way through who we are, Northern Ireland. Because if you grow up in the middle of a war zone, where you are a target because of your religion, which is nothing to do with you in the sense of that's the religion you were born into, and people who've been killed for it and murdered for it, people who've been hurt by it. I think in Northern Ireland particularly, so trauma runs through mostly everything that we do. And I think it's really important that we recognise that. So when we're doing grant making, we do grant making, trauma-informed grant making, because we recognise that. I think for me, I trained as a counsellor and I dealt with young people. I'm a great believer in counselling. I still counsel myself, and I always will have, because I would suffer from anxiety. And I think it's really important. It's really important to be open about that. And people, for some reason, think if you're CEO or leader, you shouldn't suffer from anxiety, as if mental health skips over people. I don't know why they think that, but they think it does. It doesn't. And I think the more open you can be, the stronger you are. And I'm always a big advocate for counselling for anybody, because I think that particularly talking about things or being able to express those feelings takes those stuff from inside to outside, and then you can manage them and deal with them. And I think particularly working in football and particularly working in Kicking Out, it was tough. It's the toughest job. I thought working with political ex-prisoners was political, and then I thought working in the Met was political, but it was nothing compared to working in football. It's a very political arena, mainly because there's a lot of money in it. You know what I mean? I think that we find working in football probably the most challenging I've ever worked in, and quite difficult sometimes. And I would say to anybody who wants to go into work in the game, it's a great game to go and work in, and it's great to be it. But you need to do that. You need to find out what's important for you.
Yeah. What is one thing about London that probably London gave you and you carried it back with you now? And what is something that you couldn't shake off even when you were in London, which is, you would say, a part of your roots?
What London gave me, which I loved, when it's probably the thing that I miss, is it's the diversity of people. You just don't have that here. You never quite knew your meat, and it was brilliant because I came from Northern Ireland, which is predominantly a white country and two communities, to go into probably one of the most multicultural places in the whole of the world, which is brilliant. It's fantastic. But what I always took from here was, I suppose, the sense of who I was, my family, and I never lost my accent, which people kept saying to me, we can't understand you, talk slower. I think what I remember when I first moved to London, talking to people on the tube, and people going, mate, nobody talks to anybody in the tube. What are you talking to people in the tube for? And when I came home, and my husband's English, he thought this was hysterical, that you walked down the beach and that everybody talked to everybody. He says, everybody's talking to me. And I said, because that's what being here is like. That's what being from here is like. People talk to you all the time, and it's a normal thing. And you don't have that in London. You know yourself, you don't have that. You talk to people in London that think you're slightly strange.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that happens when you meet people who are not like you is you get perspective and you bring in a sense of humor, right? It's just to see somebody doing something very different can bring in humor or lightness to sometimes even a charged topic, right? And when it's all the same kind of people having the same kind of conversation, living the same kind of lives, it is often easy to just take things too seriously. How have you built this sense of humor, lightness, right? Because many times problems resolve themselves if people can relax and have a good laugh.
I think Northern Ireland people, and they'll probably always say this, have probably quite a dark sense of humour.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't grow up in the middle of the Troubles and not have a dark sense of humour. I think I met some of the best people I ever worked with in football, and people who, you were doing a serious job, of course you were, but you could also have a laugh about it as well. I mean, you had to, because dealing with discrimination is tough and it's hard work. And sometimes you sit in meetings and you think, good God, what century are these people living in? And so you have to sometimes just be able to go out and have a laugh and say, and realise that you're doing your best, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Sometimes easy, but you're doing your very best as all you can do. But I do think having a dark sense of humour from Northern Ireland probably helped, to be honest. So yeah, I think, I'm thinking of one of my colleagues, Troy Townsend, and I worked very closely together for a number of years, for over 10 years. And I don't think anybody, and he was very serious and still remains a serious and anti-racist discriminate campaigner. But still, he's the funniest guy, makes me laugh every single time. Just because sometimes it's such a strange situation that you just have to go, we have to laugh to get out of here.
Yeah. Now, coming to your work at Community Foundation, right? It's a decades-old organization. It's not small by any means, right? But given the scale of the challenge that we face, right, even just in Northern Ireland, but across, as you said, UK or Europe, like, what do you see as the future of the organization? Could it play a much bigger role, like in a way that reshapes this whole conversation rather than sometimes just responding to what is going on?
For me, the way I look at the Community Foundation is we are the biggest funder of the voluntary community sector here in Northern Ireland. And without a strong community and voluntary sector, no country ever survives, in my opinion. The private and the public sector are good, but you need that community or voluntary sector to be strong and vibrant because it's innovative, it's creative, and it's the place that people turn to first before they turn to anywhere else. And I think the role for us is to make sure that we try to bring more money into Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland at the moment has been really constricted. The government here has been lots of funds have been constricted. So our job is bring private philanthropic money in through individual donors, corporate donors, or other foundations. And that's a really big role for us, and one I take it really seriously. It's a perfect storm because need has gone up, but money's gone down. So it's the perfect storm. So we have to try and weather that storm and try to help other people into the boat as well, who are going to get through that storm. Because, and I really seriously believe this, the voluntary community sector is the sector I'm coming from, and it's the sector I'm most proudest to be from, and the ones that make the difference every day to people. You've seen that during COVID, you've seen it in the cost of living crisis, and you'll see it as time goes on. It's people who either volunteer or people who work in the sector, and they don't work in the sector for money because nobody makes money in this sector, or kudos, they do it because they believe in what they're doing. They're not there because you pay them a lot of money. They're not there because they get big titles. They're there because they want to make the difference, whether that's through the environment or whether it's through their community or whether it's through music or art or dance, whatever it is. That's what makes us human. And I get really frustrated sometimes. Well, first of all, I get frustrated when people refer to as the third sector because it presupposes there's a first and second sector that are better than us. And also, I think when people make decisions, governments make decisions, whether it be locally or they make big decisions, the people they should be talking to is the voluntary community sector because they're the people who will make that real on the ground to people. Because that's the people, there is an innate sense of growing distrust in institutions, be that the police, be that government. You've seen that. That's what much of the reform vote's about. But people still trust the people who work in their communities. They still trust them. They still see them as the people to turn to. And that's a very privileged place to be, where people trust in your community. And I think that's the role of us as a funder. It's always a power dynamic between funders, people who have money, who want to give it away. So you always have to check yourself to make sure you realise our job isn't to tell people what they need to do. Our job is to go, what is it that you need? Then our job is to go get the money, to give it to you, and to trust you that you will do it the best that you can. So it's not for us to make you jump through hoops and make sure. We have to trust you. You know what's best for your community. You're telling me, Lushing, we need £50,000 because we want to open a youth club there because that'll help the young people. Then my job is to try and go get that money, give it to you, and trust you to do it. And people often ask me, it must be fraud. There probably is. I just don't see it. I think most of the organisations, we have due diligence to do, of course we have, because we're giving out people's money. Most of the people I give to just want to do good work. You know what I mean? And that's, in the days when it's tough for me, I always remember that because I am an optimist. And even sometimes you think, oh God, how am I supposed to solve that problem? You have to remember that the work you're doing is great and that you're lucky to be able to do it. I'm very privileged to be able to do what I do. And I never take that for granted.
Yeah. And there are multiple stakeholders here, right? When you're probably going to businesses, you're probably going to policymakers, and then you are distributing those funds, and there are people whom you can't distribute funds, right? And how does that affect your ability to speak your honest truth, right? Or where do you have to be, like, you have to hold yourself back or be diplomatic? Like, how is that relationship? Because people have different interests, and do you censor yourself or are you able to be yourself all the time?
This is exactly what I was talking about last week. We were talking about, do we see community foundations as neutral conveners or are you a principal actor? Now, I'm very lucky because I work for a community foundation, which is a grant-giving organisation, but which is primarily a social justice organisation. And that's what we are first and foremost. We're a social justice organisation that happens to be a grant giver. Now, that makes my job much easier because if a donor came to us and said, and we'd like to give you this money, so we do due diligence on all our donors. And if they came and said to us, we want to fund that over there, and it doesn't fit in with our values, we would say, thank you, but no thank you. And we've turned money down for that reason, and turned down significant money for that reason. Because you can't take that money and say, we are this sort of funder apart from that money. You can't, you don't have any integrity. So you either have to say to the donor, look, I'm sorry, we couldn't accept that money in these terms. Okay. And also because we're an endowed funder, like many community foundations are, we have a £25 million endowment, which we invest every year, and that covers our costs. So now, we have for the last 15, 16 years been an ethical investor. And I get a bit of stick about this. People go, I know, but that's not the highest return. I said, no, it's not the highest return. But ethically, we have to invest in something we believe in, which is organisations that are good environmentally, that are good from an equality point of view. I said, because you couldn't say we're a community foundation, we've got integrity, but we invest in ammunition. That's what we invest in because it's got the highest return. And we started off negatively screening and now positively screen. So positively, use our investment managers to invest in things that we think are good practice around equal pay, equal gender pay, around environmental things. Because in many ways, we do this good by giving out this grants. That is significant money to invest every year. And you can use that as a vehicle for good as well. And now I find that in the past where it wouldn't have been the highest return, it's now becoming the highest return because people will ask now, where are you investing money? Donors will ask us, where do you invest your endowment? Where do you invest your pension? People, particularly young philanthropists, are much more interested in what you do. How do you invest money? So for us, I'm very lucky, Sumit, that I don't really, very rarely have I had to be quiet about something I feel very strongly about because I have the backing of my board and my staff and my own principles, and we're very clear. And someone said to me last week, does that mean that you lose donors? I said, yes, but it also means we gain donors as well, people who believe in what we believe in. And also, when donors come to you first and foremost, sometimes they come with a very set idea.
Yeah.
You have to take them on a journey where they trust you more and more. And as you go down that journey, they go, actually, now we will invest in campaigns against domestic violence, or we will invest in the safe, because they trust you. And that comes back to the whole human relational thing. They trust you that the money they're given is safe and that the money they're given has impact. And that's what most donors want.
Yes. And I think this is a very important time to talk about courage, right? Because oftentimes we don't want to talk about something which is uncomfortable because the fear is like we might lose the trust or the relationship. But what eventually happens is people actually respect and trust people more if you can take a stand for something, right? What would you have to say for that, especially for somebody who is younger in their journey and who has those very normal anxieties or fears about losing relationships or losing the likeness or the belonging of a group if they really take a stand for what they believe in?
Look, and that's very difficult, I think, sometimes. And I've seen this happen before where people, you have to be true to yourself because it comes out sooner or later anyway. No one's that good an actor, I find, long term. They just can't keep it going long enough. And it makes you very unhappy as well. I always say this to people, try to find someone who thinks like you so that at least you have a support system. And also learn, just always try to learn things and try to educate yourself. So when people come at you and say, immigration's done this, you can actually say, actually, immigration's not done that. And facts are this and this. And sometimes I think when people love, misinformation is used particularly well, I think, by the far right. And they'll say, if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have that. And the reason why reform, and somebody was asking me about this yesterday, I think reform give very simple answers to very complex questions. We wouldn't be in this mess if it wasn't for those people, or this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for this guy. Whereas nothing's ever that simple. It's just not that simple. And so therefore I always say to people, learn as much as you can, have the facts beside you, always believe enough yourself. I mean, you get challenged and you will get challenged, and sometimes you think, God, I don't have an answer to that. Just be honest and say, I don't have an answer to that. People always ask me when I'm did a lot of media when I was in football, and I went, do you never get nervous? And I said, but what would I get nervous about? Because nobody would know my work better than me. And if I don't have an answer to something, I just don't have an answer to it. And so therefore, but sometimes you need that friendly hand. That's why allyship works. You know what I mean? Because you need someone who stands beside you, who maybe hasn't the life experience you have, but wants to support you and wants to help and say, when you think about discrimination, I always think about, people need to always think mainly about race, first of all, but there's such an intersectionality to that. And if you look at me, what do you see? You see a woman, I have a disability, I'm Catholic, I come from a minority background here, and I'm white. So that's different things. That means different things for different people. And depending on what day that is, wherever you are in your life, those things come to the fore quicker than other things. And so we're all quite complex. And I think stand up takes courage, it really does. And sometimes I think you don't have to lead, just it's a step at a time, it's a small step at a time, and gather people around you who think and sound like you, can help you. And just remember, and I never try to tell people what they think is absolutely wrong. I try to go, that's your opinion, I don't agree. Can I just say to you the reasons why I don't agree with that? And say, no, you may not agree with me, but this is where I'm at. This is where I feel very strongly about. And sometimes trying to find even the smallest, there's a guy once, I heard him, this guy, but he said, trying to build a bridge over to where they're at so they can walk back over towards you, or you can walk towards them, or meet in the middle. And I always like that analogy because I thought that's really good. And I was part of a fellowship a year ago, or a couple of years ago, for the Centre for Peace Building and Democracy. And one of the guys, we were in Oxford, said he was a foreign secretary, or he was a aide to the foreign secretary, and he said I was looking up all these books about leadership. He's asking Obama, what do you think about leadership? And Anna Van Merkel, what do you think about leadership? And he says his dad told him the best 3 elements of leadership, and I'll never forget it, was kindness, curiosity, and braveness. And I thought, absolutely. So if you can be brave and kind and curious as a leader, that's always going to stand by you, I think. And that's why I think we've put kindness as one of our values in the Community Foundation, because I think it's underrated, but being kind to people. But I think being brave and being curious, but the curiosity will make you always want to go back to what I said originally about teach yourself, learn about why do you feel that way? What does that mean to you? So that you can, if not totally put yourself in someone else's shoes, at least understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. One of the things which I have seen as a difficulty for people who are fighting for others or who are fighting for social justice is to simply focus on oneself and enjoy your own life. There's so much of life is about giving or helping others that sometimes just seeing our own brilliance and just relaxing and doing something just for ourselves become difficult or creates guilt, right? How has that been for you, not just now, but over the years?
I'm an Irish Catholic. We do guilt very well, so we do. But I don't like guilt. I think I spent a lot of time working out. I don't, so use this emotion doesn't really do anything. For me, I suppose being around my family and friends and my husband and stuff is a great time for me. I tend to do a lot. And they would say you're doing too much volunteer and stuff and things like that there. But that makes me happy. Volunteering to me isn't always about being selfless. People volunteer because you get as much out of it as people put into it. I think for me, so I really like that. And I just like reading. My mum was a librarian. So I'm some of those ferocious readers who reads all the time. I like acquisition of knowledge. It just makes me happy. So I don't go anywhere without a book, and I can't do a Kindle. I have to do a physical book, and like a physical actual book I can hold on to. So I'm not very good at that, I'd say, to be honest. And actually I'm going to Malaga tomorrow for 5 days to try and relax. But I think for me also, you're right, sometimes you can burn out if you give too much, and sometimes, and I definitely burnt out when I was in football, because I was spending far too much time working and then also going to watch football. I spent a lot of time on the road, going up to clubs who were doing stuff around inclusion. So I think you're no good to anybody who burn yourself out, really. But I'm the sort of person and that when it comes to that, which is do as I say, not as I do. So I tell my staff, make sure you take time off, and they're looking at me going, are you going to take some time off? So I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask about that, but I think I'm trying to get better about it, because it's important not to burn out. Yeah. But it's sometimes, if you're passionate about something, and you're in a leadership role in it, sometimes it's hard not to be.
Thank you for this honest conversation. One last question as you engage, what makes you the most excited when you think about the future, when you meet people out there? What is it that gives you the most light, the most excitement?
I think for me, I think young people are amazing, and there's so much more confidence than I ever had. And I'm always in awe of that. A lot of them have a really great career plan, which I also never had. You know what I mean? I fell into most things and fell out of them and fell into something else, whereas they seem to be very focused about what they want and their concerns. And I think that's really good. I think that their interest in the environment really, I think it's really great. And so when we talk to young people here, what I like best about them is they don't hold on to the past the way that we did. They'll go, that was your troubles, that was your war, that's not ours. And I think, God, they're right. We're still living, part of us and our generation and probably the generation side girls will hold on to that because we lived it. Whereas they don't. They're going like, hey, I just mine, so that's your stuff. Right? And what's good about here is less people see themselves in terms of religion, which I think is brilliant here.
Yeah.
Because instead of seeing themselves as either community, they don't see themselves as any community. They don't see themselves as having a religion. And I have religions. I'm not anti-religion. I'm just saying is it's great to see people who don't think it's the defining moment of who they are. And I think for me, I think also seeing the diversity in Northern Ireland, how Northern Ireland's changed, even since I've been home. In the past, it was white in two communities, and my best friend at school from I was 4 was Chinese, and she got so much abuse. 1 for being Catholic and 2 for being Chinese and for being adopted into family. But that's changing now. I think diversity brings everything that's positive. It brings diversity of thought. It brings diversity of culture. It brings diversity of how to do things. And I love that. That's the thing I miss about London. I think that'll make Northern Ireland stronger, not weaker. I don't see. That's why I'm pro-immigration. So I think that makes the place you live in better. And we are a country of immigrants. That's all Irish people have ever done. So whenever people say to me, Ireland's full, which that's awful accent sentence they use down south, and they use it up here as well. Ireland's full of hate. Are you kidding me? All we've ever done is immigrate to every part of the world to get Irish people. That's what we've ever done. And we immigrated because we wanted a different life through the Troubles or a better life. And is that not exactly why people immigrate? Is that not what it's about? And when they come to this country, it's immigrants. When they go to Spain, it's expats. That's the language there in itself. And I think people say, people don't integrate, and I go, have you seen many people, English people in Spain who speak Spanish? Because I haven't. It's language as well. So for me, I think that excites me is seeing Northern Ireland diversify, seeing young people come through who are not limited by historical things and think the world is theirs. I think that always excites me, always makes me really happy.
Absolutely. I think it's very easy to see just what is missing, right? And yes, probably the young people are today more lonely or more lost than ever, but that confidence, that sense of purpose, and that willingness to stand behind it and even challenge traditions, norms, or even older people is, I think it's refreshing, and we can learn a lot. Because I can look back at my life in the last few years, and I think some of the most energizing moments have been speaking to somebody young. And can you do that? Can you speak like that? And just to see that, I was just making a mess of this whole thing in my own head.
Yeah, it's brilliant because I didn't have confidence originally. I was like, keep quiet, say nothing. They don't have that. And I love that. But I think they'll get so much more and they'll change the world. And that's what we need a bit of.
Absolutely. Once again, thank you, Roisin, for coming on the show. This was a wonderful conversation, and this is a wonderful note to finish what we started and the wonderful work that you do, right? As we wrap this up, what is the best way for somebody to reach out to you to find out more about what you or the organization is up to?
Just either through LinkedIn, the way you did, or go onto the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland website, and everything's there. And reach out if you want to chat. I'm more than happy.
Absolutely. So I will include your website and the LinkedIn with the show notes, but have a wonderful day ahead and keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you, Sumit. You too. Have a brilliant day. Hopefully we'll talk again.
That's it for this episode of Choosing Leadership. Here is what I want you to know. You are capable of so much more than you currently think that you are. And that is not because I have all the answers. That is because I have lived it. I have gone from hiding behind a comfortable tech career to building companies, coaching CEOs, and standing for impossible dreams like taking India's volleyball team to the Olympics. So if this episode hits you, if it resonated with you, share it. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Tag someone who is currently playing smaller than you know that they are capable of. And if you are a leader ready to play the biggest game of your life, if you are ready to make those 100 million jumps, then reach out and let's talk about being a guest on this show. If you want to go deeper, visit tengenpartners.com or find me on LinkedIn. Once again, remember, mediocrity is a choice and so is excellence. I'm your host, Sumit Gupta, and until the next time, keep listening, keep choosing leadership.